I'm Kate Daniels. We continue to live in a highly critical time in all areas of our life. We need to know that we have a voice and that it counts. And a major way it counts is by casting our vote. Richard Bell is a New York City civil rights attorney, deeply passionate about voting. He's the author of Voting, the Ultimate Act of Resistance. He helps citizens whose voting rights have been obstructed. And he's created a great tutorial, a series of 10 lessons about voting. It's Voting for Beginners, and it's a great tool to use with students, and really for any of us voting adults, we can still learn something. Not the least of which is our right and responsibility to exercise this freedom. Richard Bell, good morning, and thank you so greatly for being with us once again.
Oh, thank you, Kate. Good morning, and thank you so much for inviting me back.
I always appreciate this opportunity for myself, for one, but really for our listeners. And even more so, in these days, we feel so challenged and maybe out of sorts thinking about all that we need to know about voting and what's going on. And it, dare I say, it feels like a crisis?
Oh, I would say it's a five-alarm fire. With no exaggeration, I think that we are living in a time when our very democracy is under attack, and no better way to attack it than to attack voting. And that's why I feel so strongly about educating people about voting.
And that brings us to today's conversation and the way to really get that message across and get people fired up in a good way.
Exactly.
Right?
So I just very recently have done a web series. It's 10 episodes. It's each are 3 to 6 minute bites. And it's called Voting for Beginners on votingforbeginners.com. And the whole purpose is that I feel that at this moment, Congress has failed us, the courts have failed us in the issue of voting rights, and the only way to get it back and to expand it is for we the people to do something about it. And I believe that the cure is voter education. And that's exactly what this series does. It's basically a how-to on registration, on voting, on following your ballot, and encouraging you and explaining to you why it's so important. And I would say that my best audience for this would be anyone from 16 to 116, because you may be a new voter. You may be someone that's voted before, but you're in a state where the laws have recently changed. And a lot of people just need a little refresher course because we don't do that. We talk about voting and how important it is, and that's great. But what does it really mean as a practical matter? And that's what I try to get to with this web series.
Yes, indeed. And so I have voted for a number of years. I am an immigrant from Canada, so it took me some time, to go through the process and become an American citizen. And I really did it primarily to vote. I felt that was the biggest impetus for becoming a citizen. So I did it. I've been voting, but obviously, any of us need refreshers, as you mentioned, and just learning small details we may not think about. So I have really appreciated this series, and from it, I took this mantra. Tell me if this is correct, Richard. Vote early.
Early, early, early. My first 3 rules of voting, and that is proof positive you've watched the series.
And it makes so much sense, and in it, what it also did for me, I thought it said, check that you have, that your registration has been accepted. So I did go in and check that I was definitely, I've been getting ballots in the mail because we do that here in Washington State, but just to see what that looked like. So that was a very good exercise as well.
Excellent. Well, you happen to live in probably the greatest state in the country for voting laws and voting procedures. It couldn't make it easier than Washington State because they send everybody the ballot. Most people vote by mail. There's no postage to pay. You have what's called automatic voter registration when you go to the motor vehicle department or another state agency. You have same-day registration. If you've forgotten it's now election day, you could go down and do it in person. So you have almost all the rules I would love to see Congress enact for the rest of the country. So Washington State happens to be just terrific in this department. Unfortunately, there's only I think it's 5 states in the country that follow you. So that means the vast majority of the country has a myriad of rules and different rules, and there's nothing centralized. And I think there's a mystery sometimes for people, not just people who haven't voted before, like young people, but people who vote sporadically or they hear there's changes. And there's a kind of mystery, and I think human nature sometimes makes people almost embarrassed to ask questions because, people don't like to admit they don't know something. I come from the school of loving questions, and this series, you're in the privacy of your home, you're watching these short episodes. It not only answers almost all of your questions, but it gives you a number of nonpartisan websites and hotlines to call or to refer to, so you can get answers to all your questions. And there is no such thing as a bad question when it comes to voting. They're all good questions.
Yes, better to get all of that ironed out so that we really feel empowered to move forward and be sure to cast our ballots.
Yes, absolutely, because I go back to Dr. King, and he said voting is the foundation stone for political action because it's the right from which all other rights are exercised. Because if we don't vote, we don't have a democracy. We don't have rights. It's the starting point for whatever it is that's important to us in policy, whether it's climate change or schools and economics. It doesn't matter what the issue is that's important to you. If you don't vote, you don't have a say in it. And actually, I quote in one of the episodes from a gentleman, the late Vernon Damer Sr., and he may not be well known, but during the Civil Rights era, he was a great voting activist in Mississippi. And unfortunately, he was murdered by the KKK for his voting rights advocacy. And on his epitaph reads something that he said all the time, which is, if you don't vote, you don't count. And I think we should all live by that.
And recognize how impassioned he was that he sacrificed his life. His life was
literally
taken. Yes, literally.
Literally. And I think one of the things that really inspired me to do this was that I do, a lot of pro bono voting rights work and on election days, and I've written a book on it. And one of the things I say is, I go to these polling places on election day. I'm an attorney, and I'm being asked lots of questions. I'm trying to fix things, or I'm going to court on election day trying to fix things. And I'm always saying, boy, if only these people knew the information a month ago or 2 months ago, I wouldn't be in this position. And I say in the episodes, please don't be that person who has that registration problem when you go to vote. You need my help, because as much as I want to help you, sometimes I can't. It may be too late. So this is what I'm trying to do, is empower people to understand that an educated voter means real power, because if you're educated, you're going to be able to vote. And I don't mean you have to sit in a college course or a graduate course. This is for everyone, for 16-year-olds, like I said, up to 116-year-olds. It's simple. It lays out the how-tos. I try to give some inspiring words to people. And I think for me, the greatest gratification just came yesterday, as a matter of fact. Your timing's great, because I had a former client call me, and when I'm not doing the pro bono work, I'm a New York City trial attorney, and I do personal injury, medical malpractice, and civil rights cases on behalf of the injured. And this former client from decades ago, she called me because I sent out the votingforbeginners.com to all my former clients and clients. And she told me that she sat down with her 4 grandchildren. And over a 2-day period, so it wouldn't be too long, they went over these 3 to 6 minute episodes, 10 of them. And she went through it with them, and they watched it. And she said, "You'll be so proud because at the end, within a few weeks, 3 out of the 4 registered for the first time, and the 4th one is too young." And she says, "I really want to vote." And she explained to her, "As soon as you're 18, we promise you." So that was so gratifying to me.
Absolutely. I can really appreciate why that would be the case. And it reminds me, we need to very specifically mention the website because you mentioned it in telling that story, but let's mention it now specifically.
Great. It's votingforbeginners.com. Votingforbeginners.com. And all the episodes are on that. And I also have some nonpartisan voter protection websites that I link to. So this is all completely nonpartisan. And one of the reasons I wanted to ensure that was because my goal is to have this website used in schools, in workplaces, in organizations. It is completely nonpartisan. I don't care who you vote for. I care that you vote. And I think we have a missing link here in America in terms of educating people, especially at school-age children, because we don't talk about it. You mentioned, voting, and then we forget it, and we don't really go into specifics. And I say, hey, let's have these children learn, because in a number of states, at the 16 and 17, you can even pre-register. And other states, it's obviously 18. And I saw during July that there were 150 corporations, including Amazon and Target and Microsoft, and they wrote a letter to Congress that they all signed. And it was about enacting the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and how important voting was and fairness in voting was. And I say, that's great. But how about a little action? How about in those corporations and in other workplaces, you provide your employees and all the people in the organization with votingforbeginners.com. Get them educated. Give them the day off, or at least a half a day off to vote if it's an in-person voting. Do something about it. It's really simple, and we'll all be a better country for it.
Exactly. And so, yes, what do we do to make sure that keeps moving forward? And asking particularly these large employers to do such a thing is to provide that education. And in states, Washington, of course, as you mentioned, we have the opportunity to do this by mail voting, and we can do it really early on our own time, which is really a great way to do it. But in states, the majority don't have that. So having the time off, other countries do it. Why would we not offer at least, some hours of a day, if not a whole day off, and have a voting day?
Okay, the real simple answer is right now we have a very divided Senate because there's the Freedom to Vote Act that's passed by the House and is sitting there going to be filibustered soon by the Senate. And it has things like Election Day becomes a public holiday. Every state gets same-day registration, 30-minute maximum wait time if you're in line, uniform rules on ID, protections for poll workers. I mean, all the things that actually, you have. You don't have many in-person voting, but of course you have it. But all of just the common sense kinds of things that any democracy would have. And because of the lack of political will right now in the Senate, we don't have it. And it's a big problem. And it's one of the reasons I did this, because I looked at this. I mean, I and other voting rights advocates have been advocating for these things for decades. And I see a Supreme Court in the last two major decisions in 2013 and 2021 on voting rights was quite hostile. So I said, wait a second. So the politicians are failing. The courts are failing. As a lawyer, that breaks